Back in the 90s, Lara Croft was all the rage in the world of video games as she had burst onto the scene with the smash hit Tomb Raider and subsequently conquered pop culture as a whole. By 1999, however, Miss Croft's star had been on the wane a little bit, which opened the door for someone else to appear and challenge her throne. And not just any challenger, Indiana freaking Jones. With 5 ultra-beloved movies, with 3 ultra-beloved movies, an iconic whip and a hat, and of course Harrison Ford's face and charm, Indiana Jones is so iconic and influential that the character transcends generations. In fact, I'd argue that he's so influential that Lara Croft wouldn't exist without him. These two have been the subject of fantasy warfares for decades, but did you know that they did battle once? Kinda. At the end of 1999, Tomb Raider: The Last Revelation and Indiana Jones and the Infernal Machine released within the same month, which meant war. This brand new Indiana Jones game was hailed as the Tomb Raider killer. The Last Revelation responded by putting a dead guy with a whip and a hat in its opening level. It's similar to how the original James Bond actor Sean Connery once challenged Roger Moore, the reigning James Bond actor at the time, to a duel of competing Bond movies. Sir Connery definitely lost that battle, but maybe Dr. Jones fared better against his successor. To celebrate the 25th anniversary of both games, I played them back to back to decide which game is better. I can't of course just tell you. Instead, I'll have the games duel in 5 different categories for points to determine an overall winner. There will be no ties, a winner will be crowned. Tomb Raider games were not known for their deep, complicated plots until The Last Revelation came and completely changed that with Tomb Raider's most cinematic story yet. It's somewhat of an origin story for Lara, as it begins way back in the 80s when she was being mentored by adventurer Werner von Croy, who was trying to instill a sense of caution in her by teaching her about the consequences of carelessness. Von Croy set a bad example, however, as his careless actions got them both into trouble, which forced Lara to abandon him and forever create a rift between the two. Many years later, in Egypt, Lara makes her own careless mistake when she raids the tomb of Set and inadvertently unleashes the god of chaos, war, and other unpleasantries onto the world. This essentially sets the end of the world in motion and forces Lara into a race against time to right her wrong. She eventually succeeds at reconfining Set to a prison, but she pays the ultimate price for it, which absolutely no Tomb Raider fan was prepared for back then. The Infernal Machine is set right after World War II and tells a good old Cold War plot. Indiana Jones is on a dig somewhere in Utah when he's tasked by the CIA to stop the Soviets from getting their hands on a mysterious weapon more powerful than the nuclear bomb. A globe-trotting adventure then ensues as Indy travels the world in search of the parts of this so-called Infernal Machine. It's very much a video game plot that's designed to get the player to as many different locations as possible with as little plot in the way as possible, and it works. I love how absolutely bonkers it all goes in the end when Indy finds himself in an alternate dimension. The plot's got several twists and turns, such as an ally that turns out to be a bad guy, and a bad guy that turns out to be not that bad.
Listen, Gennady. You don't happen to have any socialist vodka on hand? I'm thirsty.
It's a fun, typical Indiana Jones plot that never takes itself too seriously, and it stands in stark contrast to The Last Revelation's dramatic offering. So, which story do I prefer? I'm impressed with The Last Revelation's plot that not only manages to tell a story that dives deep into Egyptian mythology, but also fleshes out Lara as a flawed, multidimensional character. The fact that it all takes place in Egypt makes for a very focused narrative, but it hurts the game in other aspects, which I'll get into. I was never too invested in the Infernal Machine story, but I did enjoy it. Still, The Last Revelation definitely takes this point. Being the 4th annual Tomb Raider release and largely similar to its 3 predecessors, The Last Revelation's gameplay perhaps felt a little stale when it came out. The game did introduce some new stuff, however, like advanced interactions with items, huge interconnected level systems, and a rope swinging mechanic. But boy, do I hate those fucking ropes. What I love about The Last Revelation's gameplay are the puzzles, which I think are the best in the series. Whether it's playing a game of Senet, putting the planets of the solar system in place, or figuring out a path to ascend the Great Pyramid, The Last Revelation put a much bigger emphasis on the cerebral side of gaming, and I love that. The introduction of a laser sight for some weapons and different types of ammo are welcome additions to the game's combat mechanics as well. At its absolute best, The Last Revelation is a wonderful return to the series' roots. At its worst, it's kinda boring sometimes. The Infernal machine has very similar gameplay mechanics to Tomb Raider. Indy can do pretty much everything that Lara can do, even backflips, which looks wrong. The game is essentially a Tomb Raider clone, as it even has Tomb Raider tropes like a level without weapons and a final level that collapses. It's not a total ripoff, however. For example, Indy can use his whip for all sorts of cool stuff, such as whipping weapons out of enemies' hands. He can also use chalk to scribble random stuff on walls, and a machete to fight underwater enemies and clear spiderwebs and such. Add to all that the crazy otherworld gadgets he can use to blow up walls and stuff, owing to the game's crazy sci-fi plot. Oh, and don't forget the shovel he can use to dig for treasure, although Lara kinda has one too in her game. The game also has a shop that the player can access in between levels where they can stock up on items with the treasure they found, which really encourages you to go fully explore each level. Not the least because there's an expensive map that unlocks a Raiders of the Lost Ark inspired bonus level.
I had that idol in my hand.
Combat is nothing to write home about, but the game's boss battles are, as they are quite fun and creative. Especially the epic final boss fight against Marduk.
Get your cameras ready, folks, this ain't gonna last long.
Indy has a wide array of weapons he can use throughout the game, but only the whip gets the job done in that fight. The game's puzzles are pretty good too, but the star of this show is the amazing level variety. I'd like to highlight the Tien Shen River level here, which basically is a more well-behaved version of Tomb Raider 3's Marubu Gorge, but honestly, there wasn't a single level in this game that I didn't enjoy. Outside of standouts like Tomb of Samarkand, Desert Railroad, The Lost Library, and maybe a few others, The Last Revelation has a lot of levels that are just sort of there to pad out the game. The Infernal machine is a fresh take on a very familiar gameplay formula, and I honestly had more consistent fun with that than I did with The Last Revelation. So, the Infernal machine takes this point. The Last Revelation is the best looking classic Tomb Raider game in my opinion. Perhaps not aesthetically speaking, which I'll get to later, but definitely from a technical point of view. Animation is at its usual high standard for the series, and Lara's model is also curvier than ever due to the game's polygon boost. Now, her bust-to-waist ratio has gotten a bit ridiculous, and her head is comically large compared to other human characters for some reason, but that's really just nitpicking. The game also boasts some truly cool special effects for the time, like shiny surfaces on objects, rays of light, and Lara's body dripping with water after swimming. Textures are beautifully detailed and look better than ever, and the game has a sophisticated color palette with an increased focus on realism. And don't even get me started on those incredible looking FMVs that still hold up. The Infernal machine is, for the most part, a very attractive game, but some environments feel a little barren due to their sprawling design and somewhat plain-looking textures. Character models are all over the place, like Indy looks really good, but certain other human characters look downright goofy. Also, the game's got some pretty crude animation at times. However, the visuals are really charming. They might not be as technically impressive as the visuals of The Last Revelation are, but in many ways they are more appealing. Here's the thing, since pretty much all of The Last Revelation is set in Egypt, the fourth Tomb Raider game is a quite visually uniform game. The Infernal Machine, on the other hand, is vibrant and diverse owing to the amazing variety of environments Indy gets to travel to. No setting ever gets to outstay its welcome, unlike the drab Cairo and Giza levels in The Last Revelation, for example. The muted colors of that game are appropriate for the setting and story it tells, sure, but it's not entirely to my taste. Plus, the Infernal Machine runs at 60 frames per second compared to The Last Revelation's 30 frames per second, which may not be visuals related per se, but it's another reason why the Infernal Machine has a more appealing presentation. The Infernal Machine, rather surprisingly perhaps, takes this point. The Last Revelation saw the debut of Peter Connolly as the new composer for Tomb Raider, and he did a magnificent job with the game's score. Newcomer or not, Mr. Connolly's sound is unmistakably Tomb Raider, exemplified by this exciting track that accompanies Lara's Jeep escapades in the game. I also want to highlight the hauntingly beautiful main theme of the game that not only drips with Egyptian atmosphere, but also seems to foreshadow Lara's tragic fate. The Last Revelation also saw the debut of Janelle Elliott as the voice of Lara, who she portrayed with a truckload of wonderful sass.
Ever heard of Armageddon? Unpleasant, even by your standards.
Rebinding the spirit of Set, putting the armor on the statue at midnight at the turn of the millennium, so on and such like. I was never a believer in this magical hocus pocus. Fools, after her!
You shall command the ultimate power, that of life or death, over those you choose at your side, and in return, they will bow at your feet and give worship.
Got my fair share of that already.
Overall, the voice acting in The Last Revelation is really good.
Allah be praised. For a moment I thought I was dead for sure.
Well, maybe not that guy. The voice acting in The Infernal Machine is pretty wooden.
Where are the priceless artifacts? The gilded idols? The crowns of kings?
Thanks to English gentlemen for killing the fierce hyenas.
American. I'm an American.
It's more distracting than I thought it would be that Indy isn't voiced by Harrison Ford.
Oh no. Snakes. Open the door. I'm here to deliver supplies. You know, dig stuff. Whatever you need, I've got it.
Dig stuff? Not interested.
I'll bet you are.
Clint Bajakian's score is decent, but it failed to truly capture my imagination. Besides some geographical touches to the music here and there, it all feels very samey to me. The iconic leitmotif is cool, but it can only take the Infernal Machine so far when it's up against an auditory masterpiece like The Last Revelation. The games are just in two completely different leagues here. The Last Revelation takes this point. The Last Revelation is the fourth iteration of a formula that already was perfect in the first game. If Tomb Raider Chronicles didn't exist, I could have made a joke here and called it Tomb Raider The Last Iteration. Damn you, Chronicles! Anyway, The Last Revelation has fantastic controls and plays like a super well-oiled machine. The Infernal Machine could use some of that oil. The game's similarity to Tomb Raider has previously worked in the game's favor in this battle, but not this time. The pinpoint precision with which you can control Lara just doesn't exist in this game, where making Indy solve even the simplest platforming task feels sluggish and awkward. The controls are not terrible, but the transitional animations between actions that makes Lara's controls feel so smooth are sorely missing in the Infernal machine. I suppose it makes sense that Indy isn't as nimble as Lara, but it does somewhat hamper my enjoyment of the game that he's so stiff to maneuver. So yes, Indy can do anything that Lara can do, but Lara does it better. I will say this though, nothing in the Infernal machine controls as poorly as the Last Revelation's rope swinging, and I might even prefer its vehicular controls as well. Still, whenever you're not inside a vehicle, or on a rope, the Last Revelation is vastly superior in all aspects of controls. The Last Revelation takes the final decisive point. The Infernal machine is not quite as good as the Last Revelation overall, but in some areas it's better. In my opinion, it is the more visually appealing game of the two, and its gameplay is more fun, but the Last Revelation has the better story, sound design, and controls, and unlike the Infernal machine, it isn't far behind in the categories it didn't win. Both these games are great though, and definitely worth your time. Play them both and find out for yourself what you think. I guarantee you that you won't regret it. As always, thank you so much for watching. Take care.